Call on Members' Order of the Day number 3.
Local Government Council-Controlled Organisations Amendment Bill, first reading.
Darian Fenton.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Local Government Council-Controlled Organisation Amendment Bill be now read a first time. Mr Speaker, New Zealand has one of the most advanced systems of freedom of information in the world. We pride ourselves on our transparency and we regularly rate in the front of the pack in international comparisons. We don't have the same level of corruption as other countries, but we should never be complacent about this. Since 1982...
Order. I'm sorry to interrupt the member, but it is the habit of the House to indicate which select committee the members go at the commencement of the speech.
I apologise, Mr Speaker. It was not the indication I had from the clerk.
No, well, if the member could do that...
Yes, okay. At the appropriate time, I intend to move that this bill be referred to the Local Government and Education Environment Committee.
Thank you.
Right, since 1982... Our Official Information Act has progressively increased the availability of information to New Zealanders so they are able to more effectively participate in making and administering laws and policies and to promote the accountability of ministers and officials. There have been many other legislative reforms that have built on the principles and practice established by the Official Information Act, which includes the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act 1987, which applies a similar regime to the local government sector. Section 5 of the Official Information Act sets out the basic presumption of openness, or the principle of availability. The theory behind the Official Information Act is that the public own the information that's held by the government and publicly owned entities. Every citizen has the right to access information held by public authorities. We're entitled to see it on request unless there's good reason to withhold it, and that's not just any old reason. But, Mr Speaker, there's a gap in the accountability and transparency of our locally owned ports. Every single one of New Zealand's 13 commercial seaports are either wholly or majority publicly owned. There are hundreds of millions of dollars of public money tied up in them, yet those who own them, in other words the public, are unable to access official information. When these ports were originally built in the 19th century, they were seen as providers of essential infrastructure to support other local economic activities and to promote local economic development and employment. In the 1980s and 1990s, as part of the neoliberal attack on our economy and public assets, similar to the one we're seeing at the moment, the government passed legislation to reform the port sector. The attempts and the national government, the attempts to sell off these locally owned assets resulted in different legislation for ports companies in which the principal objective of ports companies is to operate as successful businesses. The ports companies were removed from the Local Government Act in relation to the requirement to be open to official information and local government official information and meetings Act requirements, the requirement to be a good employer and have environmental and social responsibilities. While there was clearly an agenda to sell off our publicly owned ports during that time, that has not happened. Local authorities, supported by the real owners of the assets, the people, have resisted the privatisation of their ports. But the exclusion of ports from the requirements in the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act has placed a distance between those who actually own these assets and the accountability and openness of those appointed to run them. So this bill, Mr Speaker, is about shining a light in dark places. My bill will bring publicly owned port companies back under the reach of the Local Government Official Information and Meetings Act and provide access to official information requests to those who seek information. This will mean that normal public accountabilities will be applied to port companies. In addition, it will add the requirement for ports companies to act as good employers and to exhibit a sense of social and environmental responsibility by having regards to the interests of the community in which they operate. It's a simple and common sense bill. And any political party that prides itself on openness and transparency around public-owned entities should have no problem supporting this. If the National Party opposes this bill, I'm going to be very interested in their justification, because there is none. How can anyone oppose openness and transparency in publicly owned assets? But if it's opposition, maybe it's just another instance of the National Party hiding their mates from public scrutiny. Just like John Banks, this government's about helping their mates hide their dirty laundry from the public. I'm also wondering if it's a clumsy attempt to cover up the incompetence of the board of the Ports of Auckland in their attempts to contract out their workforce and privatise the ports. Secret plans to contract out the workforce, personal information of a worker leaked to a blogger, spies down at the port, 1950s industrial relations management. I could go on. Yeah, this dispute has cost the citizens of Auckland tens of millions of dollars in lost business, in legal costs, in public relations costs, in redundancy payments for workers dumped but now rehired on fixed-term contracts, on consultants, on a posse of bargaining agents, and the possible compensation paid to contracting companies who were prematurely awarded the contracts but are unable to proceed. But no one is willing to come clean and quantify the actual cost, because the Board of the Ports of Auckland hides behind their exclusion from the Official Information Act requirements. And without this legislation, we will never know for sure what this has cost Aucklanders. There are legitimate concerns about the actions of the Ports of Auckland Board and management that have arisen during the dispute with the Maritime Union, and we need to ensure that these publicly owned businesses are open to the same scrutiny every other public institution faces. Right. We have to wonder if the real agenda of the government is to, and Rodney Hyde, of course, is to set the Ports of Auckland up for privatisation, and Rob Campbell, supported by the government's Productivity Commission, who came out earlier this year urging the government to privatise New Zealand's ports. What? It wouldn't be the first time our ports have been up for grabs, and if this government has its way, it won't be the last. So let me be very clear. This isn't just about an industrial dispute at the Ports of Auckland, even though there has been one and it's been awful. Accountability and transparency are fundamental aspects of democracy, and the public have a right to know how their money is being spent. They have a right to know about the Ports of Auckland and other ports throughout New Zealand, other publicly owned ports, just as they have the right to obtain information about libraries, schools, its airport authorities and numerous other entities. But I fear that this is a government that's setting out to destroy democracy, local decision-making and accountability. Its local government amendment bill has councils up in arms across the country. It's a disgrace. This is a government that's pursuing an asset sales agenda, despite it becoming untenable, more untenable every day. This is the government that removed Official Information Act requirements from its sale of assets, state assets bill recently. So if a sale succeeds, the 51% share owned on behalf of New Zealand people will not be subject to openness and transparency. This is a government that has denied democracy to the people of Canterbury by shelving elections until 2016 for their regional council. This is a government that shelters its mates in big business, that has no care for the environmental, social and employment and decent work consequences of their actions. It's all about a plan to dumb down our economy, to sell New Zealand off to the cheapest bidder, and to make New Zealanders pay through the loss of good jobs, of decent work and fair pay. I'm hoping that the National Party will prove me wrong tonight. I'm hoping that Nick Smith, who may be the next speaker, will stand up and say, we agree with the Labour Party. Openness and transparency is needed for our ports, our publicly owned ports throughout the country. There is no problem with citizens being able to ask for information and receive that information, which they have a right to do, which they will have a right to do if this bill is supported. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The question is that the motion be agreed to. The Honourable Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, ports